Well, thank you so much, Ms. Benford, and thank you to each for your testimony. We now turn to questions from the panel. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. And as usual, I have more questions than there is time, so I'll try to shoot through this. For each of you, the attacks on the cargo vessels in the Red Sea and the ripple effect on the global supply chain, what impacts have you noted in your industry since the beginning of these attacks? Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. The initial impact is the delay in vessels arriving both in Asia and coming back to the United States, and the redeployment of ships to cover those slots elsewhere. So international ocean carriers are rescheduling all of their ships and coming around Africa. There is a short-term effect to that as everybody replaces ships into the schedule. It will settle into a pattern of ships being in a longer transit. And in the case of Southeast Asia to East Coast, that will be probably 7 days in each direction of a longer transit. It is, of course, more acute for exporting into the Middle East or exporting into the Indian subcontinent. And with that scarcity of supply of assets is undoubtedly going to come some higher prices to users of those ocean carrier services. So I think we should also recognize that the fastest growth in trade in the last few years has been the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia as people have moved to an alt-Asia supply base. So it is challenging one of the most highest growth areas within our trade.
So that extra 7 days, does that equate to 20% in extra cost, 30%, 10%? And do you have a roundabout figure?
I do not. The actual time, depending on the individual circumstances, you can take the view on current fuel prices that the extra 7 days can be offset by the loss of the Suez Canal fees. That is not true for Asia Mediterranean or Asia North Europe. And of course, the scarcity of assets, you would have to ask the ocean carrier on an individual basis. Some can fill those gaps, some cannot.
Mr. Millar, do you have any thoughts on this?
Mr. Chair, it's an emerging issue that has yet to impact us, but we're certainly tracking it, and our concern is cost escalation.
Mr. Tucker?
Mr. Chair, another association that I represent is in a committee chair as the National Industrial Transportation League, and I spoke to the league yesterday about this, and that it is a concern because of the long time it takes to move around Africa, if that's the direction you're going. The other concern is that there are special fees that are being granted the ocean liners by the FMC, and there is just some concern among shippers that maybe those fees are not always applicable to the situation, and nothing specific that they can necessarily point to, but there's a concern there that would love a little bit of oversight and explanation around.
Ms. Benford?
I would echo Secretary Millar's words that this is something that we will be watching. When the supply chain does have disruptions, we will usually see effects of it, but at this time we are not.
So as the committee begins to develop the next proposal to reauthorize our nation's surface transportation programs, can each of you provide a few priorities, let's say one or two, that this committee should consider to ensure infrastructure investments contribute to the overall economic development, safety, and prosperity of the country? Mr. Edwards, I'll start back with you.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I would ask first that you move forward on the Water Resources Development Act, in particular for the navigation of channels. That is critical to most ports. I would say that there are just about every coastal port has some dredging requirements going forward, and we in particular have some requirements within the Water Resource Development Act for some authorizations as well. So that would be the first one. I think the second one that I would take is really just to allow the bipartisan infrastructure law to be acted on quickly is areas where we need to modernize, in particular on NEPA, and in particular with the Maritime Administration, where, by example, the Maritime Administration has not updated its categorical exclusion since 1985. There's a need for modernization.
Real quickly, Mr. Millar.
Safety, sir. Safety, safety, safety. The combined budgets of the 52 DOTs in the United States is about $200 billion a year. Crashes cost our economy $1.4 trillion a year, 7 times the combined budgets of all the DOTs. If you're going to invest in something that would pay a return to the economy in the reauthorization, I would strongly suggest safety.
Mr. Tucker and Ms. Binford, I've got about 30 seconds.
Echoes the Secretary's response, except with regard to fraud, and really this committee encouraging FMCSA to work on safety, 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 and less on commercial terms.
Ms. Binford.
I would say maintain the formula funding to sustain flexibility for our states to utilize funds in the best way that they need.
Thank you very much. Mr. Larson.